Welcome to the Daily Dispatch. First up, the State Bank of Pakistan has experienced the lowest dip in foreign exchange reserves since 2014. Second, we'll give you details about WHO terming Indian cough syrups linked to the death of 20 children in Uzbekistan as substandard. And lastly, we'll tell you about the big corporation interests versus climate change. We're here to give you the news and to help you infer the world around you. I'm Tayyaba Nisar Khan, and here is your Daily Dispatch. State Bank's foreign exchange reserves tanked to $4.34 billion, the lowest since 2014, after Pakistan made the debt repayments worth $1.23 billion. As per the estimates, Pakistan hardly has the reserves to meet the average imports of 1 month. As a result of its fast dwindling forex reserve, Pakistan is facing hurdles to import even the food and industrial raw materials. In order to reduce its trade deficit, Pakistan has been cutting down on the imports. An uneven approach with the imports has also hit various industries, as businesses are unable to import the raw materials and parts to assemble and manufacture products, resulting in the stunting and shutting down of different plants in the textile, automobile, and the nascent electronic sectors. The Textile Association has claimed that nearly 7 million people have been laid off due to their inability to have their letters of credit cleared by the banks for importing raw materials. Now, the mobile sector is also feared to face job losses of up to 40,000. Recent floods, as per the World Bank reports, have pushed between 5.8 to 9 million people into poverty, with nearly 33 million people displaced in the immediate aftermath of the floods. Now, as per the Asian Development Bank, nearly 20% of the national population lives below the poverty line. Now, to help avert an imminent possibility of default, the government has also secured a rollover of an earlier loan of $2 billion and secured an additional loan of $1 billion. These developments come after General Asim Muni's recent trip and meetings with the leadership of the United Arab Emirates. While the rollover and loan from UAE may offer a marginal respite to Pakistan's forex reserve, Pakistan still awaits the possibility of receiving a tranche from the International Monetary Fund. Moreover, Pakistan has recurringly looked at the Gulf countries to stabilize its foreign exchange reserves. The path forward for Pakistan remains to address the long-pending path to the economic reforms, including regulatory bottlenecks, which have made it difficult for businesses to invest in the country. While the incoming inflow will help stabilize inflation in the immediate and short term, which has been on the rise as rupee continued its losing streak, the country's long-term economic adversities will still be long from over. Last month, we gave you the news about the death of approximately 70 children in Gambia and 20 in Uzbekistan, linked to the cough syrups produced by the Indian pharmaceutical companies Marion Biotech and Maiden Pharmaceuticals. In a recent development, the United Nations health body, the World Health Organization, termed the Indian cough syrups linked to the death of 20 children in Uzbekistan as substandard, that contain unacceptable amounts of toxic substances. The World Health Body stated that the two syrups, Ambronol and Doc-1 Max, failed to meet the quality standards, which contain high levels of diethylene glycol and the ethylene glycol. Earlier on December the 28th, the Uzbek ministry linked the deaths to Indian pharmaceutical companies, after which the Indian Health Ministry suspended the production of the product. Earlier on October 5th, the WHO had stated that the deaths of around 66 children in the Gambia could be related to drugs produced by Maiden Pharmaceuticals in India, which contain high amounts of the same toxic substances. India is dubbed as the pharmacy of the world, being the largest provider of global medicines. It provides 20% of the global supply volume and contributes to approximately 60% of the global vaccines. Now, India's pharma industry is worth a whopping $40 billion. In the year 2021, India exported $24.4 billion worth of pharma goods, while it reduced it to $22.2 billion in 2022. Official government records show that 7,500 sampled drugs in 3 of 28 states and 3 union territories between the year 2007 to 2020 had failed the quality tests. Moreover, during the COVID pandemic, fake vials of the drug to treat COVID, remdesivir, were not only sold within the country, but also exported massively. The alarming number of deaths that occurred due to this lapse of quality control on part of not only the pharmaceutical companies in India, but also the Ministry of Health before export, will only reduce the confidence in the country's pharmacies. Indian investigation of the Gambian case concluded that the medicines were not substandard. And very soon after this, the Uzbek children's case was followed, showing that confidence is actually reducing in the Indian pharmacies, and also showing the lack of confidence in the Indian investigation. Next on the dispatch, a new study by the Harvard University and Post-Dam Institute for the Climate Impact Research has concluded that the US oil company Exxon privately predicted global warming and climate change during the 1970s and 80s and attributed it to the human activities of consuming fossil fuel, only to dismiss these findings to further their business interests. The joint study by the US and German institutes analyzed more than 100 internal documents and peer-reviewed scientific publications by the Exxon scientists and managers between 1977 and 2014. The prediction by Exxon's own scientists in the 1970s that the global temperature would rise by 0.2 degrees Celsius a decade due to the greenhouse gas emissions was nearly accurate. This study has once again shed light on the role of multinational corporations and the largest producers of the GHG emissions in deliberately downplaying climate change threats, misinforming the people through media campaigns, shaping public policy through lobbying and resorting to third-party funding, and giving precedence to their business interests over the health of the planet Earth by refusing to act on their own scientific findings. The campaign to mislead the public and policymakers on climate change is not new. Archival documents reveal that the American Petroleum Institute during the 1980s was disseminating false information to promote the public policy favorable to the fossil fuel sector. For example, it said, carbon dioxide is harmless. Nature itself is a major source. In 2020, a US congressional investigation found out how multinational corporations in the fossil fuel industry privately contradicted their public statements, calling for net zero emissions while pursuing policies that perpetuated the GHG emissions. Earth's temperature has risen to 0.18 Celsius per decade since 1981 and has increased to 1 degree Celsius now. If immediate measures are not taken to limit it below 2 degrees Celsius in accordance with the Paris Agreement, the planet Earth and human civilization as we know them will face serious threats. In more updates from the Russia-Ukraine war, Western countries are increasing their efforts to provide Ukraine with new and sophisticated weapons, like tanks, which they had earlier refused, lest they draw them into the actual war. The UK and the Polish governments have publicly announced to send a small number of tanks. This announcement comes after the United States earlier agreed to give long-range Patriot missiles to Kyiv. This is being seen as an indication that NATO members are steadily relenting from their positions to not lend Ukraine provocative weapons, fearing it could potentially bring NATO into direct conflict with Russia. This development comes as fierce battle rages on in the east of Ukraine, and armored vehicles and tanks will play a significant role in the control of fiercely contested areas and altering the stalemate. We'll now tell you about a new budding trade partnership between the United States and India. At a recent meeting between India's Trade Minister Piyush Goyal and US Trade Representative Catherine Tai, both sides agreed to set up a new working group to bolster supply chains and bilateral trade and investments. Among these, the group will also focus on trade facilitation, digitization of the custom procedures, scaling up the views of green innovation technologies, visa issues, and issues of sustainable finance. The Trade Policy Forum was resuscitated in 2021 after a lapse of 4 years and will reconvene on a ministerial level before the end of 2023. As part of the engagement, India is also seeking restoration of the GSP beneficiary status, which was revoked by President Trump in 2019 on grounds that India was not providing equitable and reasonable access to its markets. In 2022, the India-US trade agreement stood at $119 billion, with India experiencing a trade surplus of nearly $32 billion. While the United States has had concerns about less equitable access to the Indian market, India factors closely in the ongoing plans of the United States for a relocation of the supply chain, mainly from China, to outside, including India and Vietnam. The relocation of the supply chains will help United States increase the share of bilateral trade with India, which the Indian minister also believes can be scaled up to $500 billion. And lastly, as the Chinese Lunar New Year draws closer, A massive migration of hundreds of millions for the holidays is expected, raising fears of spreading COVID virus into rural areas as well. It is expected that the COVID peak is going to last 2 to 3 months. With the health infrastructure of the country already under stress due to a sudden surge in COVID infections, following China's lifting of its stringent zero-COVID policy, the cases now migrating to rural areas during the holidays will only stress it further. China opened up its borders after 3 years of its strict measures, giving hope to boost the global supply chains, which were disrupted as a consequence of the pandemic. At a time of ailing global economy, high inflation, and food shortage, China's opening up was a hope for cushioning its devastating impacts. However, if COVID cases in China continue to increase, and countries keep putting restrictions on travelers from China, such as South Korea and Japan among the dozen other countries, the growth that China hopes to achieve this year would be hard to achieve, and the global supply chains would continue to dwindle. That's all, folks. We'd be happy to receive your feedback and suggestions. We'll be back tomorrow with more bite-sized news that keeps you up to date with what's going on in the country, the region, and the globe. I'm Tayyaba Nisar Khan, and this was your Daily Dispatch.